Nikhil, I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. For the audience that don't know us, I'm Steve Hall. I'm the president of ISG Europe. More importantly, I got a really cool title as the chief AI officer for the firm. So I think we're going to have a big discussion around AI today. I think we've got a series of topics that we want to talk through, ranging from the ethical use to what the future looks like, and maybe even the EU AI regulations that are coming out. You want to introduce yourself, Nikhil?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Happy to be here. I think it's the topic of the ages now. We call it the topic of the decade. So also love your new title, which is the Chief AI Officer. I would take it a little bit back. I think I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Tech Mahindra. I've stopped calling myself that the day I saw ChatGPT. So I now give my innovation back to ChatGPT and say what it comes out with. But yeah, having said that, a large part of my work and my career has been 20 years of research in AI. I started off in 2004, and now I run a very cool place which is called Makers Lab. That's the R&D division for Tech Mahindra.
That is totally cool. And we've seen such a growth of AI ideally over the last 50 years, but certainly the last 20 years. And I keep thinking that November 30th, 2022 honestly changed the world. It was such a crucial moment. And I think, I refer to it often, as you've heard me say, excuse me, the Cambrian explosion. But what I mean by that is it completely democratized AI across the world. And it made what so many of us knew around ML, recognition, vision, NLP, all the components coming together. It made it accessible to everybody. But as we've talked about, there are some concerns with it. I think as we start at the very beginning and we think about some of the challenges, there's concerns around the ethical use. There's concerns around the data sets and how well trained the data sets are, or how deep the data sets are. Give me your thoughts on how you generally see from an ethical use standpoint, and how you see the maturity of GenAI and other products that are really driving that.
I think that's a great question, and also a great segue to start off this particular conversation, Steve. I think I see it in a very different way, right? So November 2022 for me was actually not just democratization, but also AI coming out of the winters. I think there are 2 or 3 winters that AI has gone through. I think, but you're right. The topic is very apt because it's catch-22. While AI can produce a lot of stuff and it can generate, as we have seen, there's also an ethical component associated with it. I think a large part of that ethical component is also associated with data and and how we use it. And there's a lot of connection with the human bias itself, who's creating this data, to what the AI is producing at this time. We humans are biased ourselves. So we are likely to produce that biased data for our AI systems. I just want to tell our viewers, we are actually doing some work on LLM as everybody else, but we are building these LLMs from grounds up. This is to do with Indian language. This is to do with some of the Indonesian languages as well. But to my surprise, when I go to open source and I find that data to actually train my models of LLM, I find almost about 9 to 10 different biases which are embedded inside the system. They may be social, they may be political, they may be cultural, they may be racial, and so on and so forth. Now, the funny thing is, whatever is a cultural bias, or for me, which I find is not very ethical for me as an Indian, may be absolutely okay for you. So that's where the conundrum really starts. Now, if I want to make this as a product for the world, where should I keep my guardrails, as in which is ethical on all senses of the word, for every human being who actually deals with this particular AI data? So that's where ethics really starts for me. That's where ethical consideration really starts for me. That's number 1. Number 2, is it transparent? Am I telling Steve transparently that his loan was rejected when he came to my ATM machine because he did not have so and so? I don't think we have those mechanisms as yet. And the reason for that is because we've made large amount of models and large systems which are really reliant on neural networks, who are actually a black box. We don't really have a mechanism to go back and say, look, Steve, you were rejected a loan because you are not graduate, you don't have a steady income, or you don't have kids, so we can't rely on you to give us back that money. So all of these considerations are now coming in within the ethical mode. That's number two. Number three is also accountability. Who's accountable? Now, when I say that AI is ethical, I also need to make sure that the company who's actually putting out AI or putting out AI systems in the world are also accountable for what they are saying. But there have been instances where AI systems have become suddenly bad because they have been generating language and they've not understood in terms of the mental model of the world where they're speaking to or who they're speaking to. So I think these are considerations of ethicality for me in terms of in very normal terms, in early senses, which I want my AI systems to do, at least for my customers.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that, Nikhil. Sometimes, and I talk to a lot of audiences in my new role as the chief AI officer, and one of the things I consistently hear is about the biases. But I think it can be misunderstood sometimes. I think they think that there's, a software developer sitting in Silicon Valley that's inputting those biases through. And in some cases, it's because of the data sets, or really the lack of data sets that they're using to train the AI models. But I think one of the good things on biases, when you think about training data and the use of data, I think it's going to help us uncover really underrepresented groups, whether that's in healthcare, whether that's in education, whether that's in city structure. But when you really start looking at biases across society, and you look at the AI engine as making decisions, it brings those biases to the forefront, quite frankly. So if you just think about the medical devices now, and obviously different colors of skin and pigmentation and how they can go through and how they read through it, or devices to take your blood pressure, those biases have been in those devices for a long time. Now we're getting really aware of it. So in some sense, I think the level of transparency that we're doing and bringing the biases forward is going to help us. We've got to get richer data sets. To get richer data sets, we have to serve underrepresented groups and organizations and make sure that we get and collect and do those things. But I don't think we would be having this conversation, quite frankly, if it wasn't for GenAI and some of the things and bringing the awareness of what we do. So I think that's actually a good part of the conversation to have. What's your take? Because we've seen this explosion of LLMs. And I think there's going to be some big players. There's going to be some changes as we go through. I think there's going to be industry LLMs. But in your role as sort of the chief innovation officer and really driving the TechM strategy, what would be your advice for our listeners on how we should really think about multiple LLM, similar to how we think about multiple cloud and other environments? Or is that the wrong analogy?
No, I think that's a perfect analogy, and I think we are slowly reaching that point where I think every vertical, or let's say every domain, is trying to build up an LLM of their own. They want, it starts off with an LLM. Well, I think somewhere or the other, the people have just realized after ChatGPT, look, the machine could actually create language. Now that's an interesting phase, right? So and also create language in a much more human conversational style. But I think I just want to, there's a disclaimer I want to give even beforehand. They were stochastic parrots about 10 years back. They are better stochastic parrots about 10 years later, but they're still stochastic parrots, right? So there's a level of indeterminism in what they produce, and that's what really leads into hallucination. Having said that, I think we are in a position now, Steve, that we can actually bolster down that hallucination, or maybe put down the impacts of hallucination in certain ways, right? In terms of what we do, for making it more discriminative and kind of generative systems together, right? So you know about the RAG model, the retrieval augmented generator tends to do that, make sure that your data is set and it's not really getting out in the world and creating any kinds of hallucination in terms of data. I think that's very important. But I think what I see as the future is two or three things. One, for this year at least, and for the next, you are going to see every vertical create a foundational vertical model of their own, or try and get there. Healthcare, for example. Telco, for example, right? And telecom, retail, for example, so on and so forth. At a certain stage in time, people would realize that creating LLMs is not difficult. You can put something on top of a laid structure, and you can start putting tokens and you can create LLM. The problem is the time that they require for inferencing, also the amount of cost that they're looking at for referring to these LLMs. It's not going to be sustainable. And I think there is going to be another push towards making SLM or short or small language models, which basically make sure that you still get the accuracy or preciseness of the result that you're getting in, but you're also not effectively putting in a lot of money in terms of cost, computing and training and fine tuning and so on and so forth. So I think that's gonna. I'm hoping by the mid of this year, people are going to realize, look, they've spent money, right? At this point in time, it's very experimental, right? But sooner or later, people are going to find out this kind of model doesn't really work well. It works in order to show that you are doing well and you are experimental, but it doesn't really work well in terms of cost, in terms of making sure that your configurability, in making sure that you are, it's viable, at least for the future, and it's sustainable. I think that's the change that I'm probably looking at in the enterprise world. That's gonna kick in the mid of this year.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know which moves faster, the AI hype or the financial markets and their view on it. But if I just go back let's take the last 18 months. From the first quarter of 2023, second quarter of 2023, every company had mentions of AI in every one of their reports.
Yes.
They go to the market, they go to the street, it was the number of mentions. I mean, most of the time it was 50 plus mentions as they were talking to the analysts on the reports. 6 months later, maybe even 3 months later, it was about investments. So you saw billions of dollars going into investments. What we're already seeing this earnings season, it's now about use cases and adoption and scale. So we are accelerating through this hype curve almost as fast as anything we've seen. But we are seeing clients really take advantage of this and really see how can they drive process improvement. It's not just efficiencies and productivities, it's really about completely reimagining their processes and their things, what we call systems of intelligence now. And how do you connect things in such a different way? It's one of the reasons that I really love the unsupervised learning aspect that we're unloading, because now we're starting to see patterns that we haven't seen before. Yep. And when we think about manufacturing, and our industry is famous for this, right? We always take a very industrial vertical approach. What we see now, though, is there's actually patterns that cut across that are much more interesting than what we would expect. So now you could take things like asset-heavy organizations, and what are the common patterns, and how do you drive through that? But, one of the things I want to change the topic just a bit. What are the skills that you think are most important as we go forward?
And I think the skills that we need, Steve, if you're a techie, if you want to go into the technology world, I think it's absolutely essential now, more than ever, to come out of the application layer. If you remember this industry, the entire tech industry, I think the work was done by some very smart people at the base layer of OS. And a lot of us actually started working on the application layer, right? How do you build applications? How do you make use cases? I think that is slightly changing. And now the work has started happening at the bottommost layer. You need to know at least your fundamental algebras if you want to get into techies. You want to, of course, know coding, because that's what gives you money at the end of the day. But you also want to know, some various topics about statistics, about probability, at least a little bit of physics as well, because that's getting into the world. That's the techies world that I'm getting in. If you're a non-techie and you want to understand and you still want to, play in the tech world, I think the skills are a passion to understand, at least at 50,000 feet level, what the AI is doing, right? Because a lot of people at 50,000 feet don't really have the passion to understand. All right, the work was done. It's finished. I don't care. It happened. Stuff happens, and I don't know what's going to happen. So that's the passion that you need. And I think second is, there was a term that I coined about 5 years back. You've got to be neuro-linguistic programmers. You've got to ask the right question and then validate the right answer, which is coming in, because AI can spew out almost every answer that you want under the sun. And some of it would be hallucinative. Some of them may not be, but it's your intellect that guides you to say, look, this answer looks closer to what I mean, and then take it forward. So I think that's the most important skill if you're not getting into tech world. The third thing for both of them is probably signing up an oath. I used to call it the purple oath, which means that at least whatever gets presented, right, and whatever is made, whether you are at the management end or you are at the development end, it does not harm a human being based on certain criteria. It needs to explain itself, and it needs to be a little bit more transparent in terms of what it does. I think if we can sign that oath, it's a brilliant world outside. I can't even imagine what my kids are going to do. I can't even imagine what my grandkids are going to do with this AI world. I think you're already seeing hundreds of examples where education, for example, is really being transformed with AI. Today, I think education in India, if I can call it, is more game oriented rather than more the pedagogy of reading books. Kids have lost their interest in reading books, and some people, and my parents would normally say that's wrong. But looking at the world outside, I can say that they're on the right track. So I think it's an all-round positive effect. The only thing is, with that positivity, we also have to have guardrails to make sure that it runs correctly, and is beneficial to both businesses, enterprises, and humankind as well.
Yeah, Nikhil, you hit on some really good themes there. And I think one of the key skills, if not the key skill, is probably intellectual curiosity. Always be inquisitive. But you raised a great point towards the end. And, being an American, living in Europe and having the, I guess, privilege in a sense to work across the world, I've got a pretty good sense of what's going on across different cultures at times. The US and Europeans have a very different perspective right now on AI. Now, we could do a catchphrase of innovate versus regulate,
yes,
but I don't think that really scratches the surface of what we see right now. The EU AI law that's currently being considered and passed really puts up some good guardrails. I think it's being, modeled after GDPR from a fine standpoint, but protectionist standpoint. One of the concerns that I have, though, and you can use any of the large language models, you have 9 billion nodes that are coming together from how we create the neural network. And we talked about transparency. And transparency works in a supervised thing. Did you do A or B? If you did B, did
yes,
you do C or D? But in an unsupervised world where you're looking for patterns and you're going through massive amounts of patterns based upon the weights, the biases, how it's thought through, how do you realistically get to the level of transparency? Or does transparency mean in those important critical decisions that are made? What's sort of your thought? Because we give a lot of lip service, and I think we all get it, but I don't think it's really fundamentally understood yet. What does that mean when you start thinking about decision making?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have a clear answer. I'll give you my thought process and the way we are working and my research is happening. I think it's not possible to have transparency amongst these millions of nodes, right? So the whole neural network that you're doing, I think is very, very difficult. My research for the last 20 years, after I left IBM and after I looked at AI, right, has always been to make sure, can we simplify the process of AI? Can the model itself be simplified? And if you remember, Steve, over the past 15, 20 years, there's been a debate between a connectionist and a symbolist.
Exactly.
A connectionist is a neural network engineer who wants to create everything in a connection and make sure that, just how the brain gets connected, it's actually a connected world in how the neural network operates. Whereas a symbolist is one who actually looks at symbols, right? For them, language is also a symbol. I think the way I look at this world is to combine the two and make something in the middle. And I think the moment we do that, at least the symbolics part is easily understandable by human beings. The connectionist part may still remain, will still evade us in terms of understanding. But at least over the next 5 years, if we can create a combination of symbolics or symbolism and connectionism in the AI system, we would still have better explainability and transparency than what we have now. We are not transparent at all. We can't explain anything that comes out. We can't even explain why the neural network thinks that Steve is Steve sitting over here and he's not a deep fake who's actually just planted himself in the metaverse, because it's not possible the way neural networks have gone. And so I think that's my approach. We've actually done some research in terms of what we're doing on how symbolics can actually be brought in rather than the connections support. But it's a very difficult topic. So
I think you're absolutely right there. I think the last point on both the EU AI Act and AI in general is we are going into one crazy election year across the world. I think we all know, I think it's 3.5 billion people are going to be voting this year. A massive test for democracy, maybe not so much in some other countries, but there are real concerns around deep fakes with video, with audio, with pictures and everything.
Yes.
How do we protect democracy, and how do we keep citizens informed that may not have the time and everything else to consider all the things that you and I consider?
I mean, it's so apt that two people from two world's biggest democracies are discussing this.
Exactly.
And they're also clueless in terms of how do we save democracy, which is actually a great conversation. But I think that the AI world has actually gotten us over here. I think it's the Constitution of US, and it's also the Constitution of India. And I'll pick up only two words from each of this democracy, and I think which is very important, Steve, which is with every right, there's also a responsibility.
Absolutely.
I think democracy tends to falter and fail when we only clamor about the rights but don't have a responsibility. And I think the only way to make sure that democratization of AI is better is by being responsible, by even flagging things which we think is non-fake or fake or not real, which actually goes and there's a whole slew of technologies that can be built in, right? If you give me an idea for or spare a thought, Facebook, I'm seeing some video. If I suddenly put another filter over there saying appears fake, or it doesn't appear right, it goes through a blockchain process at the back, make sure that the ledger gets updated with this video, and somebody gets checked in terms of the fakeness or whatever, and the video gets removed. We have a system of rights and responsibility to save democratic AI. Unless we do that, we are always at peril for, and you're right. I'm also scared if I get an email, even if I get a phone which says spam, because nobody knows whether the dialer was a human dialer or an AI dialer in terms of taking in my records as well. So I think the rights and responsibility has to be balanced in a democratic world. I think we are looking at the same in the AI world. You can't kill the internet. There's no kill switch for internet. Similarly, there's not going to be any kill switch for AI. I think it's going to be dependent on what we do as human beings. And I think this is our responsibility as well. I think that somehow has to grow in within companies, has to grow in within the country framework, has to grow in cross-country when you share data between cross-country as well. And I think only then we can save this.
Yeah, no, I agree. But if I just think of wrapping up our conversation, we started with the democratization of AI, and really what ChatGPT and November 30th, 2022 did, and the Cambrian explosion that unleashed. But I love it that we're finishing on the impact of democracy of AI and how do we really tie that together. I am humbled to do this with you, my friend. Thank you so much. What a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure.